All right, well, a landmark episode. Finally started the engine. I did put up a clip last week sometime. It was one day that I came out and I thought I was going to get it to run. That didn't happen. Whiteboard list of too many things I had to accomplish, and then I was kind of trying to get most of that list accomplished before I went back to work. And then it all kind of came together, so I pushed the airplane out, tied it to my car, chocked the wheels, and fired it up. Several pieces had to come together to make that happen. Welcome to episode 39. There's one day I came out here, the weather was going to be nice, kind of like it is today, but that morning it was raining, so I decided to keep myself busy and change out the brake fluid reservoir. I did have the aluminum can style, which was mounted on the back side of the firewall, per the instructions for the, Lycoming 0235 and the Continental 0200. And that reservoir was attached to this tube with a couple of Dell clamps, and the problem is it was behind the firewall, which means that to do any annual servicing, I would have to remove probably the windshield, boot cowl, all that stuff seemed like a mess. And as always, I have a lot of duplicate parts, and I happen to have this Grove much nicer looking reservoir, but more importantly, it's on the front side of the firewall where it's pretty easy to get to. And because this is a Rotex 912 firewall, the holes are already here to attach it, and then also the grommet to run the lines through. So I did spend that morning rerouting everything here, and then I had to put in fluid and bleed the lines. And since the system was dry, I knew that was going to be a little bit tedious to get it all bled out. I did go down to my local Chinese tool store and buy a vacuum bleeder, which I attempted to use to draw fluid downhill to the brake calipers, and it got to about the 80% point, and which obviously isn't good enough. My hangar neighbor came over with a device he'd built up. It was basically a garden pressure sprayer. It was adapted with some pipe fittings, and this fitting right here, which I've since got my own version off of Aircraft Spruce, it goes right on to the bleed fitting, forces fluid uphill. I made the entire thing about a 10-minute job. Pretty awesome. A couple of the other things I had to do is route the throttle and mixture cables. I created this temporary bracket, just folded up piece of sheet metal using my airport neighbor's press brake. This is a McFarlane throttle, which is push-pull, but it's also vernier just by twisting it. Pretty cool. And then this is a typical mixture vernier with push-pull knob on it. These are made in specific lengths. You can get them custom, but they cost more than twice as much. So I went with the 4-foot and just made it work. And this mixture cable is over length and you cut it down. And copying some other Kitfox builders, I decided to make this other bracket rather than drilling and putting them through the instrument panel up here, because now I can just detach it from the instrument panel if I need to get behind the panel without having to remove the cables, which is going to show you a lot of work. And so going through the firewall, the routing I chose was, this is the existing hole for the 912, which would be one of the coolant pipes, I'm pretty sure. And then this one I just drilled myself. Used a step drill, went through, and then I used these aluminum fittings. You can get them from Aircraft Spruce. I got them directly from the manufacturer. There's two different sizes. The diameter, I think it's 5/16 and 1/4 inch, like 260, whatever. And it's got this spherical ball in there that you can clip together and then goes through the firewall. And then once it's cinched down, the ball is locked in place. And one of the things I had to do is disconnect this fuel line, make a temporary fuel line that was long enough I could run it into a gas can and waste about a half gallon to a gallon of fuel, to clear out the system, clear any garbage that's in the lines, and also to kind of prime the system. I installed the second coil pack, ran the plug wires, had to trim them all to length. This coil pack controls all the front plugs. That was pretty straightforward. And what else? Then I ran at least a few of the wires to the RDAC, is my engine information system hub, essentially. The blue wires, one from each of the coil packs, are for RPM indication. If you only have one, then when you do a mag check, then RPMs would indicate 0, so this gives you that redundancy. These wires are for the fuel pressure sensor. There's a ground, there's a signal, and there's a 5-volt power. And then oil temperature and oil pressure are these two lines right here. This is all temporary. This was just to get me through engine start and verify that I had proper pressure. I did have this butt spliced together kind of permanently, which isn't really how I'd want to go. So yesterday I trimmed this and used one of these Deutsch connectors, which are mostly weatherproof. And this will again find a different home. See if I have enough fingers to do that. That is my fuel pressure sender unit, and I think I'm going to have to relocate that. And the reason is because with the engine running, it's showing me 60 psi, which is implausible because the pumps are 25. And before engine start, they just say 25. But I think it's one of those cases where the engine vibration is causing an erroneous reading. So I'm going to relocate that, use a piece of flex line AN3, which is smaller than this is 4, and just find a location here to mount that to. So I've got a lot of cleanup to do on the wires. I have to order a current sensor, which is going to strap to this positive cable, getting that from MGL, and that's going to go to the current input on the RDAC unit. And the other thing I'm going to order from them is 7 different thermocouples so I could do cylinder head temperature. Next up, I finalized my instrument panel design. These switches are all in the same place, same number of switches. I do have 3 indicator lights, although these are going to be LEDs. Hopefully I remember to describe why that is in just a minute. These MX1 displays, I moved them out about a 1/2 inch each, and then I incorporated a door, and behind the door is going to be the fuse blocks. And the door, I'm going to actually have 3 doors made so I can do different things with them. I can make one an iPad mount, I can make a GoPro mount, whatever I want, and it's just the 4 632 screws holding on. I also moved the ELT over very slightly, and I made a cutout on each side of these displays for one of these USB charge ports. Then I designed the final version of this piece right here, which it looks only slightly better than this basic rectangle. And then I put nut plate holes in all the fastener holes on here. And while I was hoping to get the engine run on that one particular day, I had some fuel leaks I needed to chase down. I had pushed the airplane over to the gas pump here and put, I think, about 4 or 5 gallons on each side. And then right away I discovered a few places where I had missed. This plug right here, which is if you have a fuel return line, and I don't, was just twisted in by hand. It didn't have any of the thread sealing on it, so it was leaking. I think this fitting and this one were weeping very slightly. This line was dry all the way forward, no other problems up there. So I drained the system, and then I took all this apart and put on the blue stuff that you can get from Kitfox. It's a Permatex product, and then you put it on the fittings, you let them dry for a while, then you reinstall them and you leave them sitting. So I put them together, left them overnight, came back the next day. All these were dry. The one thing that was haunting me still, see if this camera angle works, it's this blue banjo fitting right here. I had purchased it off eBay, one for each side. This one was leaking, even though the one on the left side was dry. So once I found the leak, which was actually pretty significant, I had to drain all the fuel out of the airplane, take that apart. I took out the finger strainer, I made sure I had enough blue stuff on everything, put it back together, waited till the next day, tried it again. Seemed like it was dry. I slipped a paper towel underneath that fitting to see if it was dripping at all, and it kind of was, so took it back apart and I was kind of discouraged. And that was the day I thought I was not going to run the engine. But I sat back and thought about it, and I realized that all I really need was enough gas in the header tank to run the airplane for a little bit. So I put gas in the left side, probably a gallon and a half total, so it filled that thing up, and pulled it outside, tied it to my car, chalked the wheels, and tied it up. And don't know if I've showed this on video recently. So the MGL stuff is pretty inexpensive, which means it's not going to be quite as amazing as just drop-in Garmin or Dynon, but it's cheap and it's very customizable, which is what I like about it. So these are my custom screens that I was able to design on my laptop. It's not hooked up to a GPS antenna right now, so, and it's also, the axes are, comm radio is not hooked up or powered up, transponder is not either. This is for an active waypoint. So if you have a flight plan in there, it'll show you your time, distance, heading, bearing rather, to target, and then it has a wind vector up here calculated between ground track and the air data system. And I'm keeping this pretty simple: RPMs, fuel pressure, and oil temperature. And I'm kind of copying the old analog gauges that the 70s rally cars, where if everything's good, all the needles are pointed straight up. You don't really need to look at the numbers and interpret them. You just know that everything's fine. I have bus volts, and this amps right here, I don't know where it's getting that number from because there's nothing hooked to it. So, but once I get that sensor on my battery cable, this will go live. Anyway, the whole point for getting this setup was I needed to know that I had oil pressure, fuel pressure, and to be able to monitor my oil temperature, and happy to say all that stuff worked. One other escapement I had, starting to feel like I still work at the Boeing company, was that I had some weeping coming out of this fitting, and I determined what happened. I took it apart yesterday, I put in a new ferrule, trimmed the line a little bit, was that I didn't trim the line square, and so when it was being tightened down, it caused that little ferrule to tip at an angle, and it just wasn't secure enough to be dry. So I've pressure checked everything, and it's all dry now, so everything's good. And now the next thing I'm gonna do is actually weigh this airplane, which I haven't done in quite a while, so this will be interesting. All right, well, I weighed the airplane. I'll say up front, I had a target weight of under 800 pounds. I put in everything: interior floorboards, glare shield, carpeting, put the boot cowl and the windshield on in their approximate locations, turtle deck. Everything I could find is associated with the airplane, even the jury struts. There was a couple things I forgot, so I've added those back in. Punchline is, aircraft is going to weigh slightly less than 825 pounds. Center of gravity is currently about 8 inches, and it's going to go back about a ½ inch when I make a couple adjustments. One is that I have the elevator for a Series 7, which has got 3 inches more cord to it. Probably not a significant weight difference, but it's going in the correct direction. I'm going to use the aero struts that I whined about a long time ago because they weighed like 3 pounds instead of 1 pound, or at least twice as much as the simple round tube type. But as long as I need weight in the tail, I may as well use something that has purpose instead of a hunk of lead or trying to relocate a battery or any of that stuff. And speaking of that, that's why I wanted to weigh it at this point. Well, there's still no fabric covering the rear fuselage, because if I had to make any of those ridiculous CG changes, now would be the time, and right now I know that I don't have to. It's time to create a new whiteboard of items. Let's see, I got a package, nothing exciting. I got one of those little fire extinguishers, a Halon from Aircraft Spruce. So I got to figure out where I'm gonna mount that. First place I had in mind was on the center console, shoved up kind of underneath the firewall, but still quite easily accessible. Given that I'd like to move a little bit of weight back, maybe it would pay to put it on the baggage floor right behind the front seats, but that's something I couldn't necessarily reach while seated and strapped in, so we'll figure that out. My instrument panel is on the way from Send Cut Send, should be here in a couple days. That includes all the pieces that go behind the instrument panel, so I'll be squeezing some rivets here pretty soon, and then getting that instrument panel up to Laser Bob so that he can do the text engraving on the instrument panel. One of the other things I got was the firewall fitting, similar to the one I ran my positive battery cable through. I have one that's, I think it's the same size. It looks a little bit smaller, so I just took a quick glance, but it's plenty big, just to route all the wires that go through the firewall, through that penetration, and seal those up. So that will enable me to move forward with that part of the project. It is unseasonably warm today. Could be working on covering, so I do need to cover the vertical fin and moving forward. And now that I know that the CG is not a circus freak problem, I can do that whenever possible. I do have a fresh quart of the of the water-based adhesive from Ortex. Anyway, home for just a few days on my way to Alaska. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.